Welcome to the latest edition of the May Appcast brief. My name is Sam Kuhn. I'm joined with Liz Anderson and Alicia Little. Alicia, she's been behind the scenes, sort of helping us run the Appcast brief for quite a few months now, and she's going to join us today to talk about the Global Talent Survey. Alicia, do you want to give a quick intro?
You bet. Hi, good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Alicia Little. I'm based in Appcast, Canada, in a city called Fredericton, and can't wait to share a sneak peek of the Global Talent Survey and the latest report.
Now, Alicia, for people not aware about Canadian geography, where is Fredericton?
Great question. I'm sure everybody wants to know where Fredericton is and potentially pay a visit. I highly encourage it. So Fredericton is the capital of New Brunswick, which is a neighboring region to northern Maine. So if you are in Boston, you can drive six and a half hours up the I-95, and that'll bring you into Fredericton.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And then, of course, we're all joined with Liz Anderson, too. You've probably seen her face. She's joined us with several Appcast briefs. So today, I'll start off and talk about the U.S. economy, and then Liz will talk about some of the latest recruitment marketing benchmark data. And then Alicia will round us out talking about the Global Talent Survey. So let's just start off with talking about the latest job numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we saw that overall job growth increased 175,000 in April. Now, what does this mean? So economists in the market expected the job growth is going to be in the 220 to 240,000 range. So it was a bit lower than what we expected, but my main takeaway is that the labor market is still resilient. It's slowing a bit, but it's not decelerating, nor is it accelerating. And this is actually, I'll dive into some of the data in a bit when I start to share some of the charts we have. But again, I think things are going steady as she goes. The pace of the labor market is, it's continue to grow, but we're not seeing, we're not entering a recessionary territory, or we're not seeing some of the really high job numbers we saw in 2022. So with that, I'll share my screen and then we'll start to talk about some charts.
Awesome. And just while Sam's queuing that up, just a reminder that you can put your questions in the Q&A section. We will get to those at the end.
Thank you, Liz. So again, here's our overall job numbers. So 175,000 new jobs. It was below forecast, but again, what we're seeing, if you sort of look back at the overall trend, not just the month-to-month change, what's the 3-month trend or what's the 6-month trend? The 6-month trend is that the U.S. economy is adding more than 240,000 jobs a month. So the 6-month trend is quite strong, and it's pretty close to the 3-month trend, which is also 242,000. So extrapolating away from a 1-month shift and this bit of a weaker job report than we were expecting, overall, the U.S. economy is performing quite well. So I want to talk about something that's been materializing a lot in this first half of the year was revisions. So after the BLS publishes this job data, they actually go back and change the data, perhaps based on new information. So we actually saw that there was 22,000 net negative revisions to the total February and March numbers. So a bit of a tick down from February and March. Most of that was in the February number. And then the actual March number was revised up, I think, from the 300 range to 315. So overall, just a slight downward revision to our previous historical estimates for February and March. So then, of course, let's talk about unemployment. So we saw the unemployment rate increase just barely to 3.9%. Again, we're in a very long spell, a historical low in terms of unemployment. So we're now at 29 months of the unemployment rate being at or below 4%. This is really quite remarkable. I mean, when you talk about historical patterns, like we saw this in 2020, and then going way back in history in the 70s and in the 50s. So again, we're still in a very tight labor market in terms of the unemployment rate. or talking about the supply of workers. So this is where we're seeing a lot of the growth from the labor market is people returning from the workforce. So we saw this massive drop in the labor supply, which is called the prime age participation rate. It's effectively the share of workers 25 to 54 that are actively working. We saw that actually decline dramatically in 2020. And then over the past 3 years, we've seen that really rebound, and now we're at 83.5%. So what this means is that the total supply of workers, the amount of people actively working, has increased since the pre-pandemic. And that's something really important, is because a lot of this data is showing us that this is why the labor force is still growing, why demand is still keeping up with pace, that we've seen still like positive employment numbers is because of the growth in the labor supply. So this is also something very important to mention. And then in terms of wage growth, we saw a bit of a deceleration. So this is something very important to the Federal Reserve when they think about, when are they going to cut rates? Just this week, we got data, or the Federal Reserve told us that they were not going to change the monetary policy. They were not going to reduce rates because we've had some issues in the past quarter with inflation. However, for wage growth, we continue to see it slowly decelerate. So I want to first focus your eyes on that dark blue line. That's the 12-month annualized rate of wage growth. So backing up all the way into 2021, we saw it was around 6 to 7%, and we've just seen it sort of glide down quite gracefully to about 4%. Now, this is still a bit higher than what the Federal Reserve is hoping for, but we're entering a territory of when they're going to feel better about when they can reduce monetary policy, when they can effectively reduce the cost of borrowing. So what does that mean? It means people like looking to get a mortgage, people looking to get a new credit card, those really high interest rates that you're experiencing. If the Federal Reserve reduces their interest rates, that's when we could see those numbers come down. So again, we're seeing very slow, steady wage growth declining. Another really big factor that's causing this is this shift away from, everyone talked about the Great Resignation in 2021 and 2022, all these people shifting jobs constantly because wage growth, there's so many opportunities, right? It was just a really lucrative labor market. And we've seen that the actual amount of people job hopping is declined. And this is really what is tampering down wage growth. So again, that's another very important trend to mention, is a shift away from the Great Resignation to now, I think I've heard it being dubbed the Great Stay. So let's break down these job numbers by industry. So again, healthcare is the powerhouse of the US economy. It added 56,000 new jobs, and this is around a pattern of 60 to 70,000 per month. So we're seeing really quite substantial job growth for healthcare workers. This is, again, wrote a lot about this on Recruitonomics, is this division between standing up jobs and sitting down jobs. So for people standing up that require like registered nurses, for construction workers, job growth has continued to maintain its healthy, steady pace. Even for example, retail trade added 20,000 jobs. For construction, they added 9,000 jobs. So all of these jobs that require you to, be active and like on your feet all day, we're seeing really a robust labor market. But when we actually look at, on the other end of the spectrum, for professional business service workers, we're seeing some real weakness. This has been dubbed perhaps like a white collar recession. Our colleague Julius Probst, he's our UK and European labor economist. He's wrote a lot of articles about how we're experiencing something similar in Europe, is that there's been a real decline in demand for white collar professionals compared to, these standing up jobs. So then if we dig into the data by industry, this is the information sector. So this is what we consider like, tech workers, this group of jobs. So we've seen a real significant decline in demand for these types of workers. So in April, they actually lost 8,000 jobs. So really, it's quite substantial, like how poor this industry is performing. And this is, again, going back to this whole talk about a tech recession, a tech session, that there's a lot of employers like Tesla, Google, and others, large tech employers that are, doing layoffs, and we're starting to see that materialize in the job data for these workers. But then we go to the other end of the spectrum. Again, healthcare, it's performing really well. I mean, the weakest we've ever seen it is in the 30 to 40,000 range, which is still quite phenomenal. So again, 56,000 new jobs for healthcare workers. And then sort of just going through some of these additional sectors, construction, we saw it a bit of a tick down, 9,000 jobs, but overall, again, it's performing quite well. When you look at the overall 3-month trend, it's around 25,000 new jobs. So this is really important because when you look at the long-term trend of construction employment in the United States, we saw a huge drop in employment after the great financial crisis, after the Great Recession. And a lot of these workers leaving this industry meant that we were not building as many homes as we needed to. And when these workers are returning and we're being able to have the labor supply to increase housing in the United States, this is really important when talking about the cost of housing. So again, I just want to mention that. And then in terms of leisure and hospitality, again, we're seeing a bit of a similar trend to construction, where we had a really strong month in March and then a bit of a deceleration in April. But overall, again, the trend is quite positive, is that workers in leisure and hospitality, think restaurant workers, think people working hotels, there's still quite a demand. And we've wrote a lot about revenge spending coming out of the pandemic, about how people and consumers still are spending really a healthy amount of money, and this is fueling growth for workers in these types of industries. And then one last industry I want to mention that I think was a surprise for all of us was transportation and warehousing. So this industry has really struggled from really the summer of 2022 up until now. And we actually saw a surprising rebound. So for transportation and warehousing workers, there was an increase of almost 22,000 jobs. There was also an increase back in February as well. So this, again, it's a nice little thing to notice, because if you look at that trend from 2022 to now, it was mostly net job losses. That because this shift away for consumer spending from goods to services is just reducing the demand for these types of workers, it's sort of coming back. And, we still see the overall consumer spending, it's quite robust. So perhaps this could be fueling some of the recent job increases we've seen in transportation and warehousing. So with that, I'll end with one last chart that I want to mention is, of course, inflation. So going into this year, there was a lot of talk about how 2024 would be the year of a soft landing, that the Federal Reserve could reduce inflation without causing a recession in the labor market. And we were really close to that point. I was very hopeful. And I believe it was in February and March, we started to see inflation numbers actually start to pick back up. So what this data is showing us, this is the inflation data that the Federal Reserve watches quite closely. And you could see that starting really into the new year, we've seen a bit of a tick up in inflation. So what this means is that the chances of a rate cut this summer are probably dwindling. But, it is pushing us further later into the year. And a lot of the explanation for why we've seen these recent increases in inflation can actually be explained by housing. So I talked a bit earlier about the demand for construction workers and how that could be good news for reducing housing costs in the United States. So what we're seeing is this lagging effect of inflation from how the Federal Reserve and how government agencies calculate housing inflation versus, private market research groups like Zillow, for example. So we're seeing this gap between inflation data. It's slowly starting to decline. And what we're seeing is that as that gap between market rents and actual rents, like that the BLS calculates, as that gap finally closes, we'll start to see some inflation decrease. But right now, we're sort of in this holding pattern where we are observing higher inflation, and we just have to be cognizant of that as economists. So, of course, I just wanted to mention that. So with that, if there's any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I'll shift over to Liz Anderson, who will talk about some of the latest recruitment marketing benchmark data from Appcast.
Okay, thank you so much, Sam. Yeah, great remarks so far. I just want to reiterate that although it was a little bit weaker than expectations, that was still a strong jobs report, and it was good to see. So if we can switch to the next slide, I'll start talking. Yeah, so as we can see, cost per click has kind of plateaued recently. Recruitment costs have come way down from their highs in 2022 and 2023, but cost per click is a little bit harder to bring down than, say, CPAs, where you can kind of increase the apply rate and have a dependably lower CPA. However, we have seen CPCs level off. They're now around 90 cents, and this just means that there's going to be more traffic per job ad, which is really a positive thing for recruiters as they're trying to attract more and more candidates to their position. And as we can see, that lower cost per click has garnered higher apply rates, which you can see in the next slide. Those apply rates have increased and continue to increase to almost 5.7% most recently. And I think this is just something that Sam said earlier with the supply and demand of the labor market coming more into balance. We see this in the increased job seeker participation and apply rates and lower CPAs. It just means that there's going to be more options for recruiters, and in short, it's becoming an easier job for recruiters. And as we can see from the CPAs, not as expensive to recruit either. Same if you go to the next chart, that we can see that CPAs have fallen from their highs of almost $30 to just around $17.50 in the past couple months, which is really remarkable considering how, I mean, I remember in 2022, that's when I started here at Appcast. It was just like, oh my God, these are so high. And now that they've almost halved, like it's a completely different market for recruiters. And of course, not every sector is equal, but I mean, Sam, if you go to the next slide, you can just see how in 2020, they were really low because of the recession and COVID and all of that. And as you can see, that huge spike in 2021, 2022, 2023. And now as we moved into 2024, they've been reliably lower for the first quarter or so. I mean, at just 1733, that's lower than they were in 2020. And that's a big change for recruiters. It makes a big difference. But Sam, yeah, go to but as I said, it's not just, I mean, not every sector is alike. Something we like to say at Recruitonomics at Appcast is there is no one labor market. And as you can see, if you're recruiting in healthcare, which Sam mentioned was a super strong sector that just continues to grow at a really healthy clip, you're going to see much higher CPAs. So these are CPAs for registered nurses. And as you can see, they are far above that $17.50 I mentioned before. They're at nearly over $51. And that's, I mean, they have come down since the 2023 highs, but it's still a difficult sector to recruit in. And you can see that's from really low apply rates. Those are at just 1.8%. These jobs are, bottom line, just hard to recruit for. And there's not the labor supply and demand curves are not matching as perfectly as they do in the labor market on the whole. So yeah, that's what we mean when we say there is no one labor market. There are different sectors that have different supply and demand curves that are going to create different recruitment outcomes for recruiters. And if you go to the next slide, Sam, you can see that even within healthcare, I mean, there's no one labor market even within the US. Like if you go up to the Northeast, it's a bit more expensive. Whereas if you're down south recruiting for healthcare workers, it's going to be a little bit less expensive. So that's just something to know. And then as Sam said, there have been some other laggards in the labor market, like the tech session that we've been talking about. And we see this, you know, playing out in their recruiting costs as well, as people have laid off, as tech companies have laid off workers and have kind of flooded the marketplace with a lot of impressive talent. CPAs have gotten a lot lower as recruiters have a much bigger talent pool to pull from. So these are at 1407, below the labor market average. And as we can see, if we go to the next slide, that's because these apply rates are going higher and higher at almost 7.5%. So that's just something to know. When we say there is no one labor market, you have to really watch what your specific sector is doing. And a great way to do that is by looking at our labor market snapshots, which are released quarterly and coming out next week. And you can kind of dive into each sector specifically. But yeah, with that, I think I will hand that over to Alicia to give a bit more information on a very exciting report from our colleagues at Stepstone.
So exciting. Thanks, Liz. So let me tell you a bit about the Global Talent Survey. I'm super excited about this. It's a triennial, had to look that up, every 3-year survey effort that's done by Boston Consulting Group, the Network, and the Stepstone Group, of which we are, of course, a proud part of. And Appcast was responsible for driving responses to this survey in the US and Canada. So that's our role. We've been involved for the last couple. And so this, we just launched the first report from this round of survey last week. And as you can see, it's massive. It's massive. There's 150,000 respondents from 190 countries. So that's significant. And it's largely based around trends in mobility. And I think why this is really pertinent, as you heard from Sam and Liz, is clearly there are pockets within the labor market that there still exists more significant gaps in supply and demand. And so, in an era of increased mobility, in an era of many economies looking towards immigration as an option to seek more workers, and also in the realm of trends in skills-based hiring and transferable skills, looking to a global perspective represents a significant opportunity to potentially fulfill your hiring needs. So let's hop ahead to the next slide, Sam. So this is big. 1 in 4 professionals are actively seeking jobs abroad, and that's huge. Let me quickly talk you through what you're seeing here. So the benefit of doing this every 3 years, of course, is that we can look at trends over time. And you can see that relatively little movement within mobile as a last resort. So like move if I have to. Passively mobile means I'm willing to move, but I'm not looking. And actively mobile means I'm willing and I am looking to move. And just a quick language clarification here, because I was saying to Sam and Liz yesterday, I'm like, we talk about mobile and mobile apply rates and trends in mobile. This particular slide is not talking about cell phone trends. Okay, so we're talking about movement of workers in that perspective. So you can see overall willingness maybe has dipped, but those who are actively mobile has dipped up from 21% during the last round and 23% this time. And where that stat of 1 in 4 comes from is really just an extrapolation of the global labor force. So the labor force participation in active workers across the globe. And so taking that 23% and cascading it across. So clearly a big opportunity. What's next, Sam? So I just told you there are 1 in 4 people who are willing to move, looking to move. This slide is all about folks who are willing to work for companies that don't exist where they currently are located. So again, if you're looking towards attracting a global workforce, potentially, maybe you can't convince them to relocate to where you are and work physically for you, but that doesn't mean there doesn't still exist opportunities to attract talent and have them work for you remotely. So this kind of represents that. And I wanted to call it out because remote work is such a huge trend. And you can see some of these regional percentages are quite significant. So again, like tapping into those opportunities as needed. And of course, this is for jobs that can be done remotely, of course. So not one size fits all, but wanted to call that out. Moving right along, this is one of my favorite visuals that is included in the report every year. The Canadian at this party does not love that we dipped from 1 to 3 since last time. However, for my US colleagues who have held steady at 2nd place in terms of where people want to move, that's awesome. And you can see the visual is so good, this data visualization, but you can see Australia, beginning at number 7 from the first edition of this survey, has slowly crept up to surge to the top, but that doesn't mean Canada and US still aren't in the mix. So why Australia? Some of the reasons that were cited in the report are the quality of job opportunities, quality of life, and income tax and cost of living. So which regions are most ripe? I meant to change that word, awkward word, with willing workers for the US. You can see, again, we're just calling out some of those regional pockets, and this is a bit of a different visualization. So let me break it down for you. I've called out the US because I think we typically focus there, but essentially if you're seeing like ones and twos, that means the workers in those regions are most likely ranking the US as one of the top places that they would relocate to. So you can see Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, and jumping up to the top, even other parts of North America would be willing to relocate to the US. Moving right along, so let's zero in on the US a bit more. What makes America attractive for relocation? And so I've chose to include the US alongside the global trends because, as you can see, there's very little difference. And I think there's probably no shocking results here. The global workforce wants to move to a place where English is a working language. Potentially, they already do know and speak English. There's good salary opportunities. There are opportunities for equitable and inclusive work places. And the other thing that makes it attractive is support for relocation and onboarding. And you'll see that in the subsequent slide as well. So this is what makes the US attractive. What are global workers' expectations for the US? So in the survey, respondents were asked, how can an employer inspire you to accept a job? And so the reason that I think this is really important for you is if a global workforce is part of your recruiting mix, or potentially, and you have like significant needs, I think these are really important things to call out, both in the job ad, to call these out clearly, because this is what people are looking for, to really reinforce this during the interview process, and in some of those initial conversations. And so personal contact with the future manager. Your job is one of the biggest decisions that you make in your life, and moving across the world is also a pretty significant decision. And so anything you can do to make this a smoother, make people feel supported, I think is ideal. So contact with the manager, being open to negotiation, sharing and providing information about the country, what the experience is like living there. Contact and support from a relocation expert. And then lastly, contact with the future team. Again, like, it's nice to know who you're going to be working with, not only like the actual workplace, the people, but also your new home, right? If you're going to move and relocate, you want to have the information you need to make an informed decision. And then this is very much mirrors that. How could an employer support your initial experience of working in the US? So obviously, and again, this was resounding, as you can see at the bottom, 75% of respondents indicated some of these reasons as well. So support with visas and work permits, support with housing and relocation, additional language support, and then, of course, legal and financial advice. I think we can move along there, Sam.
And with that, yeah, so that was a great summary, Alicia. I appreciate that. I want to sort of tie the knot back to how this relates to the labor market. And what we're seeing is that obviously the US, North America, is a very attractive place for job seekers, and this is materializing in the latest immigration data. So I did a webinar with Andrew Flowers last month about artificial intelligence and immigration, and sort of how we're seeing this impact the labor market. So if the US and Canada are such attractive places to work, it's increasing immigration. So we're seeing the latest estimates from the Congressional Budget Office has showed a significant increase in the overall amount of immigrants into the country. Now, what does this mean for the labor force? So without immigration, by 2040, the US population is expected to decline. So this is a really important thing. Is without new people entering the United States or Canada, or the US specifically, US population will decline, and then we'll start to lose workers. So with that, I just want to, again, summarize the overall US labor market is not accelerating, but it's not decelerating. We saw some really strong job gains earlier in the quarter or earlier in the year, but again, 175,000 new jobs. It's right on pace, and unemployment rate still below So with that, I want to turn it over to our listeners in case there's any questions about the Global Talent Survey, about latest recruitment data, or about, of course, the labor market.
Yeah. And we know we're right on time here. As you see, Alicia just put the Global Talent Survey, the Decoding Global Talent Survey in the chat. So we won't hold you up for too long, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask, or if you think of any later, reach out to any of us on LinkedIn, over email. We're more than happy to converse with you afterwards. Beth Maney asks, are many large companies offering this relocation support? I think that might be a question for you, Alicia.
Beth, I don't know off the top of my head. I have to imagine if they're looking to attract workers that they're willing to offer that support, but I don't have any data on it offhand. But thanks for the question. I can follow up. And also just wanted to call out too, I think Grant had asked about the report. I dropped a link to grab the report, the Global Talent Survey report. And also our colleague Franzi Eckhart penned a great article on the Recruitonomics site, kind of digging into the US specific trends. So definitely be sure to check it out.
Great. Well, with that, I wish everyone a fabulous, great rest of your day and a great weekend. So bye, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.